done with your major, and then that's another way where you can help pay for school. So let's dive in maybe a little bit and talk about institutional programs. We've talked some about this already, in that at your institution that you're considering, they could have both a variety of merit and need-based aid programs. They may use the FAFSA. I know at K-State, we do use the FAFSA even towards some of our grant programs. So especially this year, what I would definitely recommend for all of you out there is definitely complete the FAFSA. You might be sitting here thinking, nah, we're not going to get anything. They're not going to get, I'm not going to be eligible for anything. You don't know that, especially this year, because there's so many changes that are happening. So definitely fill it out. I would say, like, for me, for my family, we always fill out the FAFSA. We may not take some of the aid that's been offered, but at least I am not leaving any stone unturned, right? Maybe the school has the results of the FAFSA, and maybe through that I do get a scholarship. So fill it out. You're not obligated to take what's been offered from you in those cases. Let's see, let's jump ahead here to just talking more in detail about the different types of aid. So we're talking here about federal grants, kind of coupling together the source and the type. The source coming from the federal government, and then it's a grant program. So the Pell Grant program is the largest grant program, and that for this upcoming year, they have really expanded the Pell Grant program. So there's going to be more people eligible for Pell Grant. So again, definitely complete the FAFSA. SEOG is also listed up there. SEOG, you'll find in the world of financial aid, we love acronyms. So here's your first one. SEOG, that stands for a Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Basically, it supplements the Pell Grant. It's additional grant money you can get if you're Pell Grant eligible. One thing to know about SEOG, though, is that schools only have so much money that they're given from the federal government. But once that's been awarded, it's depleted. So what you need to realize there is that this is where that priority date, or making sure you get the FAFSA completed by the school's date, this is where it becomes really important, because you want your name in the list of people considered for SEOG. You don't want to be applying after that priority date, because the school likely has awarded or depleted all of those funds. So you want to make sure your name's in the list, right, to be considered for any types of financial aid. So SEOG is another supplemental grant program. You do, of course, have to complete the FAFSA to be considered for all of the federal grant programs, and they're generally awarded to undergraduate students who have not yet completed their first bachelor's degree. So federal work study. So this is another federal aid program. Federal work study is, like as mentioned before, it's a way where you can maybe have a part-time job. A lot of times it's students like to have a work study job because maybe your class schedule allows, maybe you have a 2-hour break in between your class schedule, and so maybe that allows you to go into work 2 hours, you're on campus, you're there, you can go work a couple hours. Sometimes you might get connected with maybe a professor that's in your major, so you get connected with the program you wish to pursue as a career. Work schedules are often very flexible, and so it's just a nice opportunity to earn some extra money to maybe help cover some of those expenses. And then we also have the student loan programs. Student loans are the federal direct loan program. That is, of course, the federal government's largest program. Student loans, there's a couple of varieties of them. So the first one, or the best loan option, if you're considering loans or maybe need to look at student loans, the first one you want to consider is the subsidized student loan. And the subsidized loan, the reason why that's first on your list is because it is a loan that doesn't have any interest while you're in school. So if you're only borrowing, say your first year you have to borrow $3,000, and it's 4 years later, that loan is still $3,000. It hasn't grown with interest because the government is actually paying the interest on that loan while you're in school. So you don't have to worry about it growing. To contrast that, the unsubsidized loan is very similar. The main way that it's different is that it is a loan that does collect interest from the point it's dispersed. So if in your freshman year you borrow that $3,000, but it's an unsubsidized student loan, that loan will collect interest while you're attending school. You do have the option to pay interest while you're in school, or you can just opt to pay the interest and the principal once you're done with school. The loans, of course, we're just talking about interest, right? So the interest rate on the student loans are set every July 1st. So right now, that's the interest rate on loans that are being borrowed this year. Repayment on student loans is 6 months after you either graduate or drop below half-time. So if you're in school and you're complete your degree in like record time in 3.5 years, you'll go into a 6-month grace period, and after that is up, that's when you'll enter into repayment. The other loan program that is available is the Parent Plus loan. The Parent Plus loan is a loan that's intended for parents. Parents would borrow this loan to help with their students' educational expenses. There is a credit check that is performed on the parent when they apply for the loan. So the parent would need to have good credit to receive this loan. If by chance the parent is denied for the loan, then what happens is the student is then offered additional unsubsidized student loans. So again, unsubsidized would be a loan that does have interest collecting. The interest rate, similar, is set every July 1st, so that's the interest rate on the loan currently. What's different also about the Parent Plus loan is that repayment begins more immediately. The loan, once it is fully dispersed, which means usually there's a fall disbursement and then a spring disbursement. Once you have that spring disbursement, the loan's fully dispersed. It's 60 days after that loan is fully dispersed, the parent would enter into repayment. So it's a little more immediate, but you do have the option. You can elect to defer repayment until the student's done with their school, with their academic program. All right. So shifting gears now, moving away from federal sources of financial aid and now looking at state sources of aid. The link listed on here brings you directly to the Kansas Board of Regents application. Their priority application date is May 1st. I don't believe their date has changed. So May 1st, you'd want to make sure you complete the state application. They have a variety of different scholarships and grant programs. This past year, I will mention one thing that was kind of nice to see them change was on the first scholarship that's listed here, the state scholarship. You used to need to complete this application. This past year, they changed that, and they said, we don't care if they haven't applied. If they're eligible, give them the scholarship. And I'm like, hallelujah, thank goodness, because we had so many students who hadn't completed the application, and so they were missing out on these scholarship dollars. So I really appreciated the state taking away that kind of hindrance from a student getting a scholarship. So I can't promise that would happen this year, so your takeaway is make sure you complete the application. There's the link, and so do that. Anyway, they have a list of different scholarships and different grant programs available. I encourage you to check out their website. What I usually do to find their website where they list more information, right? Google is our friend. So you Google Kansas Board of Regents financial aid. There it is. So you can read more about the different programs to see if your student might qualify for some of these programs. All right, and then private aid. We've kind of already touched on some of these, that where private aid can come from. Community foundations, maybe churches, businesses, your company. So again, just kind of the takeaway on these is be aware of deadlines. They sneak up on you, and starting your research early. I have to admit, I'm preaching to the choir. I have a high school senior. Have we done the research? We're working on it. So anyway, there's a lot of great scholarship search tools out there. This is just a quick snippet of some of the logos of some of the companies that do scholarship searches. I'm sure institutions that you're considering, they probably have a web page that lists different scholarship search engines. One thing I would caution you, if there's a fee for it, for a scholarship search, don't pay the fee. There's so many where you can do the same thing for free and be matched up with scholarship opportunities. There's a lot of great ones out there. So we see a lot of, it's amazing. I have to tell you, at the beginning of August in our office, you would be just amazed at the stacks and stacks of scholarship checks that students bring in. So how that happens, though, is the students done the hard work. They've applied for scholarships. So here's just some tips, some resources. Hopefully you can encourage your student too to do some of these things. So definitely maybe create a portfolio. And what I mean by that is maybe your students completed this scholarship application. Definitely save everything you've done on there, because you don't know if something you did on this one scholarship application, maybe you can pull out the answer to this one question, fine-tune it, tweak it, tailor it to this other scholarship company, scholarship organization, kind of make it fit what that application is about. Maybe a minimal effort, right? And then you've applied for a second one. But that's because you're using, right, everything that you've done before. Definitely think small. Here's an example of a student just last year. Working with this student in June, he was coming through orientation and he was just listing a variety of different scholarships. You know, it might have been 250, it might have been 500, but the point is all of those add up, and when it was all said and done, like everything was covered. Everything, tuition, housing, it was all covered. And so it does take time. Think of this as it's a job. It really can be a job. You can spend a lot of time doing this, but maybe the payoff is better, right? You probably have heard the analogy where, you know, maybe a couple hours spent here working on a scholarship application maybe nets you $500. And when you consider that, you know, 2 hours spent and $500, you just earn $250 an hour. Who doesn't want that, right? So do spend time on it. You know, stay organized. Don't make mistakes. Proofread it. Ask others to proofread it. Make sure it looks great. Wealth of resources as far as high school counselors or teachers, financial aid officers, all these different places where maybe you can look for those outside scholarships. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the changes coming to the FAFSA. So this is, they've recently just said this, that these changes are the most unprecedented. It's significant ever since the Reagan era. So if any of you remember that, I mean, how long ago has that been? 40 some years ago? So these changes are monumental. So the changes include, of course, they're completely revamping the FAFSA. You may remember how it used to look. It's going to look totally different as far as the process. Definitely a reduction in the question. That was the whole goal. It's called FAFSA simplification. Hopefully it's simpler for you as students, as parents, to complete the application. As mentioned earlier, it's going to really expand the federal Pell Grant program, and then we're going to introduce a new terminology. The bottom bullet, before we just thought, okay, sometime in December, and really that's the best I can tell you still tonight is sometime in December, next month, right, in a few days. It has to be open by December 31st. So that's what the Department of Education is saying, is that the FAFSA will be available by December 31st. So we're all taking bets, right? And we're all guessing it will be December 31st at 11:50 p.m., right? So they'll meet the criteria. So I wanted to talk a little bit about terminology, and sorry if this is like super boring part right now, but these are really some new concepts. So the terminology of a contributor, that's basically anybody who's going to be required to provide their federal tax information on the FAFSA. So it's not a new concept. They're just putting a term to it. So that, of course, is a student. The student, when they complete the FAFSA, their federal tax information or their wage information is necessary. But then parents, as well, are considered contributors. What they're doing with this is the part where it's all going to be very different. And we'll talk a little bit more about it later in the presentation, but they've really kind of pulled apart the FAFSA in this way where the student goes through and completes just their section, and then they invite a contributor to come into the FAFSA later and complete their section. So it's very different. It's kind of pulled apart. It used to be very much all in one big application. Well, they've kind of broken it up a little bit, if you will. The second item listed here, the FAFSA FTI approval. This is really an important step. If you see the italicized words down here, if approval is not provided, basically you're not approving for the release of your federal tax information to be brought into the FAFSA, then the student's not going to be eligible for federal student aid. So they're going to make that very clear throughout the whole FAFSA application process that if you don't provide your consent or your approval, then your student isn't eligible for federal aid. They do try to point out through this, providing your consent does not make you liable for, except for the Parent Plus loan, liable for any aid. Like you're not required to fund the education. That's really just going to help the student help determine the student's eligibility. And then another item that's changed is they've just replaced the term household size with family size to make it match with the IRS. A new item here is the provisionally independent student, and this would be for students that have maybe unusual circumstances where maybe they're from a ruptured family situation where they maybe don't have contact with either parent. They're really kind of living on their own. Maybe they're from an abusive type of situation, or maybe they're homeless. So a better process for those types of students that might have those unusual circumstances. Another big change coming. A lot of you have probably heard in the past the terminology EFC, or expected family contribution. Well, that terminology is going away. It's being replaced with now SAI. So again, an acronym, right? SAI, or the Student Aid Index. And all that really is just a measurement of the student's eligibility. It's how we'll use that later in awarding financial aid. It can be a negative number, so that's something new too, is the Student Aid Index can now be negative. And then the last item on here talks about the Future Act. That's the law, the Future Act, and the direct data exchange. And that's just where now we're getting in a better method. The IRS tax information directly comes into the FAFSA. Some other terminology where might be helpful to know about, especially this top one, would be special circumstances. And that's where maybe as a family, the FAFSA is based on income information from 2 years ago or from 2022. But maybe in 2022, right, you had a different job or you had different things going on, and now things are different. And that's where you can talk with your school to see if maybe they can take a look at those special circumstances and make an adjustment to your federal aid application. And then the last one we've kind of talked about a little bit, unusual circumstances. That deals with students that don't have a parent in their life. Maybe it's an incarcerated parent, abusive parent, or just human trafficking. Now here's the really fun part. I know you all are excited to read these, but this is changes in the application. So before, child support was treated as untaxed income, and now it's being moved to an asset. Here, right? These are super thrilling things to hear about. That particular change, that's actually going to really help you out. When it was untaxed income before, that really made a hit on the student's eligibility. So that's a good shift. It's going to help increase eligibility. Businesses, in the past, small businesses, if you had a business and you had fewer than 100 employees, you didn't have to include that on the FAFSA. With this new FAFSA, you do need to include the value of your business. So you would have to figure out how much is that net worth, how much, the value minus the debt would need to be included. And similarly, if you have a family farm, that's another change. For years, it's not been a part of the FAFSA. For this next year, it is a part of the FAFSA. So if you have a family farm, the value of that would need to be included. A big change, and we'll see how much this impacts students' applications, would be the number in college. They're going to ask it, but it's not going to play a role in the student's eligibility. In the past, that used to help make the student more eligible, but they've changed everything, so the number in college isn't going to impact the student's aid eligibility. The next one, I guess, I appreciate, right? Hopefully, if you're contributing to a retirement account before that had to be counted on your application, that now doesn't matter, so that's a good thing. And then also the item right below, if you've been saving in a 529 plan, and if you have multiple children, in the past you used to have to include the value of all your 529s. Even if you're just completing it for this one student, and you've got other siblings coming along behind, you had to put the whole value on that one student. So it's kind of penalizing that one student. So they're changing it now. So you'd only list the 529 value for the student you're applying for. So that's good news, right? That would drop that value from the sum total to just what that student's is. So tonight or tomorrow, your task, if you haven't done this already, would be to apply for and get your FSA ID. That is going to be your username and password. We just did this last night for my senior. It didn't take really too long at all. You would need to know your student's social security number, date of birth, name. But that's the website you would go to. You would go to studentaid.gov. That's the one site that you have to remember. They've changed it. They've made things better. So just remember studentaid.gov. That's where you'll go to apply for a new account. That's where you'll go to complete the FAFSA. That's where you'll go if you happen to borrow student loans later to complete additional steps to receive your student loans. So does the student need an FSA ID? Yes, they do. I've just told you my daughter and we just did her FSA ID. That's the way she's going to electronically sign her document. Does the contributor need an FSA ID? Yes, all contributors need an FSA ID. So you as the parent would need an FSA ID. One thing that is different too with this upcoming year is, and this would be in situations where as a parent, maybe 2 years ago you were single or you filed your own tax return, but you're now married and your spouse's tax information is on their tax application, that person, the step parent, or would need to have their own FSA ID and then also log into the FAFSA to complete their section of that. So that's kind of a big change too. Here's what the FAFSA will look like. As I mentioned, studentaid.gov, that's where you go. You can see kind of right in the middle there, it says FAFSA form. When you get to studentaid.gov, that's what you would click on to bring up this page. And just taking a look at like where we were last year. Last year it opened up on October 1st. This year, because of all the changes, it's been pushed back to December. But hopefully next year we'll move back to normal and it should open up normal time October 1st for the 25-26 year. And then you can always see the tax information is always generally 2 years old. Let's see, we've kind of talked about this already, about the direct data exchange. And we've mentioned a little bit where you do have to provide your consent. You have to approve that, yep, please pull in my federal tax information. If you do not provide that consent, they give you that. This is exactly off a prototype they had. Your student will be ineligible for federal student aid. So they're making it known. Let's see. Your FSA ID, your little assignment that you have, that would be your signature. So you would just click this button and submit, and so you're electronically signing that way when you log in. This is a slide I wanted to add. This is actually something from a conference I attended today. So this was the federal, the U.S. Department of Education, their conference today about federal student aid programs. So they were educating us about the steps that contributors will experience. So you're getting the benefit of seeing this brand new information. So like on step 1 would be for a contributor. A contributor, you're going to receive an email. So I'm going to back it up to step 0. I think you kind of need step 0. So your student has maybe signed into the FAFSA. They're completing the FAFSA. They've done their section. And they've identified, yes, there's a contributor, a parent that needs to provide their information. So what's going to happen is the student's going to need, here's the part where I can't believe they did this. But anyway, the student's going to need the parent's social security number, the name, date of birth, and the parent's email address. So all those identifiers, the email address, then they're going to, the federal student aid is going to email the parent to say, hey, your student is inviting you to complete the FAFSA as a contributor. So then the contributor, if you haven't already done step 2, you'll either create your studentaid.gov account or your FSA ID. You can do that within the FAFSA. I would encourage you to get it done ahead of time. Just get it done so it's already in place. Then you'll log into your account on step 3. You'll review the information, provide your consent, and that information will flow into the FAFSA. So that's kind of the steps that'll happen. So that's how it will be different. It's very different than in the past, as I've mentioned, where the student's going to complete their section, and then the contributor will be invited by email to come and complete their section. So we've talked a little bit about the SAI. The SAI is the Student Aid Index. Again, that's just an index of the results of the FAFSA, letting you know, okay, here's your index of the family's financial strength, maybe. The SAI is going to stay the same regardless of what college your student plans to attend. So it doesn't matter if your student goes to an out-of-state school or maybe a private institution, right, where costs are higher. The SAI is going to stay the same. And the reason why I bring that up plays into this. Each school has what's called a cost of attendance. The cost of attendance obviously are things like tuition and fees, room and board, books, supplies, all those things that it costs to go to school. So that total varies obviously between the institutions, right? A private institution and out-of-state institution would have a higher cost of attendance. I'm going to jump ahead to this slide. Right, that would be indicated by number 1, a higher cost of attendance. And then 2, that might be like your state schools, kind of like K-State, KU, Fort Hays, Emporia, kind of the middle of the road, if you will, as far as expenses. And then 3 might be community colleges, technical schools, where their costs, their tuition, their other would be a little bit less. And you can see the student aid index stays the same between all those institutions. And so need at the end, and here's where I should have went in order. Need, that's how need is determined, is you take your cost of attendance minus your SAI, and that determines need. So if you think back to when we first started this presentation where we talked about maybe to be eligible, some aid is merit-based and some aid is need-based. Here's how need is determined, right? It's just taking your cost of attendance, subtracting out your student aid index, and the remaining portion is the need. Now you guys know the mysteries of financial aid right there. It's all spelled out. We talked a little bit about special circumstances. Yeah, there's a question. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that very first slide, it was all purple, right? And it talked about need-based aid and non-need-based aid. That's largely non-need-based aid is largely like your unsubsidized student loan. Let me go back to this picture here. So let's take, for instance, your SAI equals 1, right? Your cost of attendance is $40,000, wherever you're going, right? And your SAI is $40,000. Your need is 0, but can you still get financial aid? Sure, absolutely. You could still get scholarships because maybe that's merit-based. You can still get federal aid. It just would not be need-based federal aid. It would be non-need-based federal aid. That's in the form of student loans. So that would be your unsubsidized student loan, and your Parent Plus loan would be non-need-based forms of financial aid. So thank you. That's a great question for clarification. So special circumstances, we talked a little bit about this, right? Special circumstances, think of this as life happens, right? The FAFSA seems to be pretty black and white, right? Just pull in the tax information, black and white. It doesn't really indicate like what's happening in the family, what's going on. Maybe 2 years ago, yeah, I was working a lot of overtime because whatever was happening in 2022. But now things have kind of gone back to normal. I'm not making as much. Maybe I took a different job and I'm making less. Maybe there were a lot of medical expenses that you had to pay out of pocket. Whatever it is, reach out to your school. Reach out to your financial aid advisor that might be at the school your student's planning to attend. Explain what's happening. Explain what's different. That's what they're... that's what I'm there for, too, to help you figure out, okay, I understand. Let's see what we can do to take that into account. Maybe we can make some adjustments to your FAFSA. Maybe through those adjustments, maybe we change that $40,000 EFC, SAI. We change that high student aid index, and maybe we're able to drop it down where maybe they become grant eligible, or maybe they become need eligible, maybe getting better types of student aid. So definitely, like another takeaway beside don't miss any deadlines, right? That's number 1. Don't make sure you do that. The other takeaway would be reach out to your school. Your school is there to help you out. Your school's there to help make going to that institution possible. That's what we're there to help you through. So those, just talk about the different examples. We kind of talked about that already. So as far as where do we go from here, if you haven't done this already, make sure you're out there checking the institutions that your student plans to attend. November 1st just passed, November 15th just passed, December 1st is coming up. Those are a lot of important dates for schools within the area. Maybe those were their admission priority dates. Maybe that was their scholarship priority date. Make sure you know some of those dates, meet all those application dates, apply for different scholarships. So definitely do all of those things. And now I would welcome any other questions you might have. Be glad to help you answer any question you might have. And Mr. Ross has a microphone, we can capture that. I believe they're making a recording or maybe streaming the video tonight.
Do both parents need the contributor ID?
The question was, if it didn't come through very good, do both parents need a contributor ID? So if in 2022 you as a parent were married, filing jointly, you're still married to the same person, nope, just one person would need an FSA ID. It's only in the event where things are separate, right? Maybe you were married, your tax return filing status was married filing separately, where you filed two different tax returns. That's when another parent contributor would maybe be necessary. So good question. Yes? Yeah, great question. So the question was, when I talked about some of the changes they were getting rid of the contribution you made to your retirement account, and is that a difference between just the annual amount that was contributed that year, or do they need to know like the sum total of what's in your retirement account? Currently, they do not ask, you're not supposed to list the total value in your retirement account, so that hasn't changed. So you would not list now or in the future your total value of your retirement account. And so what's different is in the past you used to have to provide how much did you contribute in the 1 year into your retirement account. That now is all gone. So everything about retirement is gone. So that's a win for us. So good. The question in the back.
Do you have to create a new account if you already have one?
Yeah, so do you need to create a new FSA ID if you already have one? No, if you already have one, then you do not need to create another one. You're in good shape there.
With family farms being included as an asset now, do you believe with that change in the SAI that would be excluding people from the need-based aid? What's your opinion on that?
So that's a good question. And with the change where now the family farm is required on the FAFSA, I think it's really probably going to impact students and families. We'll see what happens. I mean, they've changed the whole formula where they're protecting more of the income, but this is income that's never been on there for years and years and years. So we'll see. I'm a little worried for that whole population of people, right, that have family farms, and that's their livelihood, right? Just like small business owners, that's their livelihood, and how that's going to impact them. So I don't know. Time will tell. Yes, question. Yeah, so the question is, with the number of students enrolled in college, how many people in the family size are attending college? With that question gone, where maybe all of a sudden you have 2 going to college in 1 year. And now it doesn't matter, right? I would foresee, that's going to have an impact on the student aid index. And so the question was, are institutions going to look at that as a special circumstance? Every institution can make a determination. That is something the Department of Ed said, yes, we could do a special circumstance on and make an adjustment. It might vary from school to school, their approach to it, as far as like what they would do. Like, would they reduce the income, or would they? But to answer the question, yes, it might vary from institution. Some institutions might say, no, we're not going to do that at all. That's just a change, and that's how it is. So, but other institutions might be different. So, good question. Yes.
When small businesses have to provide their net worth, how does that work when it's owned by multiple people? Like, there's multiple owners of the business.
So how do, when it's owned by multiple people? That's a good question, and that's where it gets more complicated, right? Because it's not a Schedule C, probably, more than like, where you business. I'm thinking maybe Schedule E on a tax return. Maybe. With that, I would probably say, yes. She'll ask her financial advisor. Is that, I don't know if it's like, if you had to sell it, here's the net worth, so here's the value minus the debt, and then if you have to divide it up between 3 ways, is that what you do? I would say that's as good a guess as I. They might have instructions on the FAFSA, within the FAFSA, on that particular question. Yeah.
I have another question. How do you find the D35 form? From military?
The D35 form?
Yeah.
And I suppose that's more for like the GI Bill or educational benefits. I'm not totally sure, but that is a great question, as far as like another avenue, another source really of paying for school would be through the GI Bill or the military, the VA benefits. I know as far as to start the process, a student would need to get their certificate of eligibility. Schools will ask for that so they can see the percentage of eligibility in what chapter. I would definitely probably reach out now to the school. Any school probably, they'll be glad to help you with that information, as far as, okay, what are the steps to take to start the process? Because like the FAFSA, the VA is its own process, and getting enough lead-in time to that's probably important. So I would probably encourage you to reach out to the school your student's planning to attend to see what their process is at their institution, that institution. Well, I want to thank you all for your attendance tonight and for listening to me drone on and on about the fun topic of financial aid. If you do have other further questions, feel free to come up after the presentation. I'll stay down here and answer any other additional questions. But thank you so much for attending tonight. Mr. Ross, Ms. Ball, any other follow-up?
I don't think so, but yes, thank you for coming. And as we continue to receive financial aid information and scholarship information, we will add that to our website and send those out via Parent Square. So they come out every week as Counselor Corner. We didn't want to send 20 messages a week, so we send one every Friday. You should be receiving that. And so anything that's new, any updates just in general about seniors, especially scholarships and financial aid, look through the 12th grade Counselor Corner, and that's where that information will be. And as always, you can reach out to us here at the school if you have questions or need any other information. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.